What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, Barry Sanders is gone. Barry, what? Every time this dude fell. We got the first injury report of the week for the Lions and for the Broncos. It's crazy how fast this week is going. Just Monday, Tuesday flew by. Today, we also very likely have the All-22, but we have a lot to dive into in this video. I mean, we got the injury report, we got some notes from some coaches, some players, plus we got some awards, and finally, we're going to look at how the Lions can still make the playoffs. Even though it's super unlikely, I've had some requests to do it, so we're going to do it in this video. So let's get it started.
The city's been down, and it found a way to get up. And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down. We're going to take another hunk out of you. Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
Welcome everybody to another video. Glad you guys are here. This one is much different because as we're going to fly through this, it is huge. Like, it's huge. However you want to put it. It's gigantic, enormous. Rhinoceros. Are an elephant or rhino the same thing? No, they're not. They're not. Are they within the same? The Lions injury report is huge. Now, right now, as of this very second, I don't have Denver's side. I'm not sure. I'm not sure where Denver's side is. I've been looking for it. I don't know if they're going to drop it. I don't know where it's going to be dropped. So I'm just kind of wait and see. Take a look at the Lions side first, and then we'll take a look at the Broncos, assuming the Broncos side is going to come out, whenever it does. Okay, now, again, warn you guys, this is a huge injury report for the Lions. So here's what's really going on. The Lions are dealing with kind of a illness outbreak, and we kind of saw this pop up last week a little bit with Kadero Hodge, Penei Sewell, and a couple of players. John Pennicini, right before the game, who wasn't active, popped up with an illness. And I guess it's been sort of spreading around, and now a lot of players are dealing with this for the Detroit Lions. Now, Dan Campbell said it's not COVID, because there is a player on COVID, which we'll get to. It's not COVID, but it is an illness. It's more flu-like for a lot of these players. So today in practice, they did sort of a walkthrough, but they decided to split it up. Offense in the morning, defense a little bit later in the day. Make sure that they didn't cross paths, I guess, as much today. So today was kind of a weird practice. We've had a lot of walkthrough days, but this one was a little bit more strange than that. So I guess they were kind of just running routes, going through things. Josh Reynolds talked about it, said it was very, very light today. So yes, this injury report is pretty big, pretty massive. And we got some updates on these players individually that are dealing with the illnesses. But just keep in mind that. And Dan Campbell does say that he believes it's kind of on the end of this where this is going to pass, hopefully. So I guess we'll just keep an eye on it throughout the week and see who comes back, see who gets healthy. All right, let's throw up this Lions injury report, man. Yes, that is big. It's probably the biggest one we've seen. There's a lot of illness, as you can see. Let's get into it. Let's start at the top with Michael Brockers, defensive end. Knee injury that was up last week, but he did play in last week's game, even though he was listed as questionable. He's also dealing with the flu-like illness. So we'll keep an eye on Michael Brockers as he had no participation today. I got to believe that the players with no participation probably didn't show up because it was a very light day is what we were told. So I would believe that anybody that says did not participate probably didn't show up to practice. They probably just stayed home. We'll talk about that when we get to Jared Goff, who's up next, I guess. Okay, Jared Goff, no participation with an illness. Now, Jared Goff apparently met through a Zoom. So he did a Zoom call, which means that he likely wasn't there for the Lions. And he said he's actually feeling much better. He said on Sunday he didn't feel very well. Monday he didn't feel very well, but Tuesday he felt pretty good. And Wednesday he feels fine today. It's an abundance of caution for these players right now with the illness. So I'm assuming he didn't go in today, which probably means that Boyle was probably throwing passes and it was a mental day and maybe they did some things through Zoom. I don't know how it went down, but I would believe Jared Goff probably wasn't there. But the good news is that he does say that he feels pretty good. So again, maybe that means that this will pass through pretty quickly. That's the hope. Today, no participation. Jonah Jackson, also a new addition to left guard. Julian Okwara with an ankle injury. This is a new injury for Julian, and this is a little concerning because we know Trey Flowers is on IR, so we're already missing one of our starting outside linebackers. We know Romeo's out for the season, so we're already kind of light at this spot. We have other guys that have stepped up, played a little bit. You know, guys like Jesse. We saw a little bit of Rashad Berry last week. So we have some other pieces, but you do hope that Julian Okwara is able to get through that and he's able to play this weekend. John Pennicini, who did not play last week, he was inactive with the illness. He had no participation. So we saw a little bit of Bruce Hector. He had no participation today either. We'll just see how fast this passes. I really don't know. Jalen Reeves-Maben, no participation. Now, his was shoulder, so he could have been there. He could have been there and just been out, you know, just walking through things. So I'm not completely sure with guys like that. I'm sure anybody that didn't feel well wasn't there. But Jalen Reeves-Maybin, no participation with his shoulder injury. That held him out last week. He did not practice all week, and he did not play last week. We saw multiple guys get involved a little bit defensively. We saw a lot of Josh Woods. We got to see some more CJ Moore. We saw a lot of guys, if he came in because Jerry Jacobs, went down in that game for a small period of time. So we got a lot of guys coming involved. With John Pennicini not playing last week, not only did we have Bruce Hector, we saw a lot more Levi and Ali McNeil than we've seen recently. DeAndre Swift's shoulder injury, he's been dealing with this injury, and Dan Campbell says, all I can tell you is that he is improving. He said, I can't tell you really right now where he's going to be at. Now, last week, I think he said that he was hopeful that it could be just a week injury, so that basically meaning he would be back this week. But he said, I can't really tell you where he's at. All I can tell you right now is that he is improving. So he's very up in the air for this weekend's game. I really don't know which side to lean to with it. I really don't, because we've heard kind of from both sides, and the fact that there's no participation usually isn't a good sign. But we'll see. It's the first day of the week for practice. Big V, illness, no participation. He did play in our last game, and I thought it helped a ton, but no participation from illness. So both of our guards not practicing. Speaking of offensive line, let's talk about Evan Brown real quick. So Evan Brown, we know he's on the COVID list. It's different. This is apparently a flu-like thing. He's on the COVID list. He was placed here on Monday. All right. Now, what do we do without Evan Brown? Well, there's still a chance Evan Brown could come back this week, so I won't count that out. But if there is no Evan Brown, we know Ryan McCollum, who we've seen play a little bit of snaps when Evan Brown went down and then he came back in. That is our backup. Ryan McCollum is a solid center, from what I remember going through him when we brought him in initially. Evan Brown will be a name to keep an eye on because we know he started at center. And I thought he didn't play a great game last week, but as a whole, I thought the offensive line played pretty darn well. I mean, he got beat a few times, but we know he is already our backup center. So we're looking at the third string position. So we do have Ryan McCollum. And also keep in mind, we do have Parker, who was on the practice squad. And the Lions changed the 4 players that they protected this week. Shane Zylstra, the tight end. Aldrich Rosas, the kicker, probably to keep that kicker position and kicker battle alive with Riley Patterson. And Bruce Hector, the defensive lineman, who did play a few snaps last week. Those are the 4 players that they decided to protect. So that's kind of an insurance option. So maybe they don't need to go out and sign anybody, even if Evan Brown can't play. They would just have another option. They would probably bring him up to the active roster if he is not able to go by this weekend. So we'll keep an eye on that. Nick Williams, illness, did not participate either. He's one of our starting defensive ends, as well as Michael Brockers. Austin Bryant, outside linebacker, dealing with a shoulder injury, limited participation. He was dealing with the shoulder injury last week, but he did play. He played 50-plus snaps. So we'll keep an eye on that, but it was limited. So that's the good news. Hawkinson's got a new injury, hand injury, got no updates, don't know where this came from, but he was limited today, so it hopefully is okay. Matt Nelson, he did not play last week. He was kind of up in the air last week, and then he was listed as an active. He didn't play with the ankle injury. Right now, he's listed as limited. Bobby Price dealing with his shoulder injury. We've seen that from Bobby Price last week, and because of that, we had other guys, like Iffy. We were talking about potentially giving us some help on special teams, but now he's limited, so maybe that's actually an improvement from Bobby Price. He finished it off with Penei Sewell, who's dealing with the shoulder injury, which, going back to Thanksgiving, also the illness is what we saw last week with Penei Sewell, but he was able to play, as according to Dan Campbell, he went to him and he's like, I'm playing on Saturday, and you couldn't talk him out of it.
I got a ton of respect for Sewell because I'll just say this: he wasn't 100% in that game. He came to us Saturday before the game and said, I'm playing, and and there was no talking him out of it. There was no talking him out of it.
So shout out to Penei Sewell. Got to give him a lot of credit for that. And just on some good news. We're talking about illness. Why not give you guys a little bit of good news here? So Jayshon Cornell, who is on the NFI list, non-football illness, will return to practice today. Now, this was weeks ago. I don't know if this had something to do with starting it, but he's back. So he's returning to practice. So with Brockers and Nick Williams and all of this going on, there is some good news within this, I think, with Jayshon Cornell. So that's cool. We haven't seen him for a while. And I do like Jayshon Cornell. Now, we're pretty deep, but I think that's one of those guys you kind of forget. And it'd be great to get him back for maybe these last 4 or 5 weeks, because at that point you could at least maybe have a better judgment on should he be brought back, or is this a player that we're moving on from? Because he already moved on from Deshaun Hand. So hopefully that means he's coming back and we could possibly mix in a little bit of him. But we're already seeing some Bruce Hector, so he needs to get back out. It's a huge injury report, but keep in mind, a lot of these are illness, and it's also a walkthrough day, so it's very cautious, is what Jared Goff said. So I'm sure anybody that felt any type of sick, they were just like, stay home. I'm sure that was the message that they relayed, and they were trying to get an extra day to hopefully get a lot of this to pass. We'll see if that works out. The good news is guys that are no longer in here, like Kadero Hodge, who had this last week. He was able to play in the Vikings game, so hopefully that means that it can pass pretty fast. You no longer have Jerry Jacobs. Jacobs wasn't on the list, but he did get dinged up, but he's not on this list, so that's the good news. Also, Trinity Benson. Trinity Benson is weird. He did not play last week. Maybe that was just more of a depth thing, because Kennedy did get some snaps, so maybe they just chose Tom Kennedy over some Trinity Benson, or maybe he was dealing with an injury. But today he's not on that list, so it makes you kind of feel like, okay, maybe Trinity Benson is okay. They just went with Tom Kennedy over Benson. We're here with the Broncos side of the injury report. Now, I know this is a little bit later of a video because theirs came out a little bit later, but they have a 2-hour difference. So expect tomorrow's to be kind of late as well. And then Friday, it should be a little bit earlier because usually Friday they drop their injury reports early. All right, but let's take a look at this Broncos side. They did come off a Sunday night football game against the Kansas City Chiefs, but I didn't hear anything about this being a walkthrough, but it definitely could have been a lighter practice today. That's usually what we see on Wednesdays at this point in the season when you're a little bit later into the season. A couple of key names here. KJ Hamler. We all know about KJ Hamler coming in from this offseason. He is on injury reserve. Hamler was a 2020 draft pick for the Denver Broncos. I made it sound like it was this season, but that's, I don't know. The offseason just kind of like went together. I just remember talking about KJ Hamler a lot. Now, we still know they got weapons on the outside. They got Jerry Jeudy. They have Sutton. Now, there's been some questions about their production when they're on the field at the same time, but they definitely got weapons. There's been questions about how their offensive coordinator has done things with Noah Fant, utilizing him. Of course, they got good running backs. So we'll talk about that in a second, but I did want to point that out. Hamler was a 2020 draft pick. Josie Jewell also on here. Good off-ball linebacker. The issue is that, as you can see, he's on IR, so he missed a pretty good amount of time. And you got to adjust when you got some of these injuries. I mean, they brought in Kenny Young from the LA Rams recently after they let him go. I remember when they let him go. And they also have Baron Browning out of Ohio State from this year's draft. I liked Baron Browning. They're playing him, I guess, as an inside linebacker. I haven't watched a ton of film, though, so I'll have to, keep that in mind when I get to this a little bit later in the week. But they got some names on here. The Draymond Jones, I mean, when you look at him, he's had a good season, 3.5 sacks, but 18 pressures. Their secondary, Kareem Jackson, Justin Simmons. You just see some of these names. Kyle Fuller, Ronald Darby, Patrick Surtain. Like, their defense is pretty darn good. Bryce Callahan, very talented cornerback. He came from Chicago when they brought him in. He's their slot corner. Very good slot corner as well, but he is also on IR. But the reason I want to point Bryce Callahan out is not just because he's a talented player, but also because today begins his 21-day period where he is working back. So we've had this with multiple players this season. The 21-day period begins today for him as he is now returning to practice. So we'll keep an eye on that, which means that he could possibly play. I mean, of course, he's a good corner, so it wouldn't hurt me if he didn't play. But anyways, let's continue down with this. Next up is Graham Glasgow, the former Detroit Lion. Okay, we all know about Graham Glasgow playing the right guard position. Now, Quinn Meinerz, I don't remember how to say his name. All right, I know he was out of the small school coming out of this year's draft, but he was one of the top small school players coming out of this year's draft. This guy is he's a people mover. He's known for his run blocking. He's playing at that right guard position. Bellamy, he was waived off of IR on Tuesday, a running back, and that's probably because the guy that we're about to talk about, Melvin Gordon, could be back this week, the running back. But anyways, I just want to touch on a couple of those names. Look at this injury report now for the Denver Broncos. Kind of fly through this. The first name is a very big name. It's Bradley Chubb, the outside linebacker. Look, the Broncos, we have a lot of connections, or I should say ties, with Vic Fangio and a lot of kind of ways that we do also things defensively. So you'll probably see some similarities when you look at it schematically when we get to that later in the week. But Bradley Chubb, outside linebacker, dealing with a shoulder injury that got banged up in that Kansas City game, and Vic Fangio said it kind of hurt his play a little bit. He did not participate today. He does feel all right. So there's some good news there. And with how he said he was feeling, he said the ankle isn't really an issue anymore, but there is the shoulder injury that got dinged up against the Kansas City Chiefs. That brings us to Shelby Harris, another big name on this defense, one of their defensive ends in this 3-4 defense that they play, dealing with an ankle injury. It's kind of weird. Did not participate today as well. So we'll keep an eye on that because they do play that 3-4 defense. You see Mike Purcell, who is their nose tackle in this 3-4 defense, about 330 pounds, dealing with a thumb injury. But as you can also see, he had full participation. But Shelby Harris did not. So the defensive line, a huge one to keep an eye on. I mean, this is a really good defense. They're top 4, I think, in scoring defensively. They have a really nice secondary. Fangio is kind of known for what he's able to do in the back end, but they got a lot of talent there. Patrick Surtain is getting hyped for, Defensive Rookie of the Year, and definitely for the Pro Bowl as well. He's been getting a lot of hype, a top pick in this year's draft out of Alabama. At the quarterbacks, they have Ronald Darby. They have Michael Ford, as you see on this list, a former Detroit Lion, for some depth. So even without Callahan, this is a good defense, especially in the pass game. 11 interceptions at the team, only 15 touchdowns allowed. I think the fourth best passer rating allowed. And their run defense isn't bad either, at least according to runs, yards per game. A good defense. That's what they're known for. Their offense has had some struggles. The quarterback position has gotten some play. Their offensive coordinating position has gotten a lot of blame. People saying, well, we can't really judge the quarterback until we get a better offensive coordinator. That's kind of what the noise is around the Broncos side. And some people are just like, no, Teddy Bridgewater, he's a one-year quarterback. He's on a one-year deal. This is not the future anyway. We know Drew Lock is not playing right now. Instead, it is Teddy Bridgewater, who's also on this list. But one thing you should know is on the road, they got a good defense. That's what you should know. And holding Kansas City 22 points is not easy, especially considering that 7 of those points basically came on a pick 6. Anyway, continuing, Melvin Gordon, this is a big one. Their top running back, but this season, well, this offseason, remember they drafted Javonte Williams, who is just an absolute stud. All right, so, I mean, he's coming off the best week of his career probably in the NFL. I mean, 100 yards rushing on 23 carries. Really, the last 3 weeks, he's been really good. I mean, the last 3 weeks, he's been a very good running back for them, one of the top rookie running backs in the NFL. And I expect that to continue throughout his career because he's a very talented running back. Melvin Gordon, however, is now back. Now, he didn't play last week against Kansas City, and that's a big reason we saw so much of Javonte Williams. But Melvin Gordon is back after missing with a hip injury in limited fashion, so he could be back to play. And honestly, between you and me, I'd rather have Melvin Gordon take some snaps away from Javonte because I'm pretty sure Javonte averaging like 4.8 yards a pop this season. He's really good in a limited touch that he's had. I know he's now over 600 yards rushing. Okay, Bobby Macy or Massey, I'm assuming it's Macy. I'm not for sure here. He is their starting right tackle dealing with an ankle injury, limited participation today. Mike Ford, as we said, full participation. I mean, he's been a huge special teams player for them. Hasn't played it done defensively. He's missed some time with an injury, but he's been big on special teams. Malik Reed, the outside linebacker who is the backup to Bradley Chubb. He is dealing with a wrist injury, but he had full participation. Caden Stearns, that's a name that we talked about a lot coming out of this year's draft. Caden Stearns out of Texas, the backup safety to Justin Simmons, who, as we know, is the Walter Payton Man of the Year award nominee. So shout out to him. Teddy Bridgewater, tibia injury, the quarterback, full participation. However, he should be able to play this week, so I assume that he will play, and Dan Campbell's got a lot of respect for him. He may not be a huge playmaker, but he will take care of the football. That's one thing you got to know, and we remember him back from Minnesota. He's beat us a few times because he is pretty athletic as well. And you wrap it all up with Andrew Beck, who is their fullback, full participation, dealing with an elbow injury. But you know what? I really don't care that he hurt his elbow. If we're being honest, I don't care. I don't know what that's from. Okay, it was a joke. I don't know if the delivery was very good there. But anyways, that's the Broncos side injury report. I know this is later, so I just kind of try to fly through it. And throughout the week, we should get some updates from their side. Tomorrow's maybe out later as well because of that, but we had extra things to throw in today, so that's why this video was much longer. Go through some of the notes that we have from Dan Campbell, Vic Fangio from the Denver Broncos, Josh Reynolds, and some awards, some nominations that were given out. Plus, we'll take a look at how the Lions could still possibly make the playoffs, even though it's super unlikely. All right, so let's take a look at this. So, of course, Dan Campbell talked about it, right? I mean, how practice was very light today. Josh Reynolds said it was really light because we know they split into 2 groups because of sickness, which I'm going to assume because I'm recording this before I'm seeing the injury report that it's throwing off the injury report big time. So we'll see what that looks like when we get to it. Speaking of last week, he talked about Jared Goff, and he said he thinks it could help Jared Goff's confidence. Really, specifically that last drive that he had the touchdown, because he said he made some outstanding throws. Then he had that sequence of 3 to 4 plays, which weren't very good. We know the interception. Then you come back, you have the fumble, but then the stay poised and have that last drive. He said, I think it can help his confidence, going forward. Now, we're going to take a look at a lot of this in the All-22 tonight, assuming we do it tonight. I think we will. So check it out. Okay, if we are live tonight, you should definitely check out because we just won our first game and it's going to be hyped to look through some of this. And after watching the offense for the last couple of days, I think there's some of these little pieces of the puzzle that we've been kind of getting notes of what's going to happen, how the changes are going to be made, and you're seeing it all kind of come together. You're seeing a lot more St. Brown at Z receiver and some of the minor issues that I think that's leading to, but also some of the good that's leading to. Simply just the Josh Reynolds effect has been huge. How this offensive line has played better, which has led to Penei Sewell being named the second best offensive tackle since week 6, according to Pro Football Focus, which is in the NFL. I'm not even saying this right. The second best offensive tackle in the NFL since week 6, according to Pro Football Focus. That's nuts. His pass pro has still had some ups and downs. He has 5 sacks technically allowed this season, 8 penalties. That's been way too many. Pass pro seemingly has been better. He's been so good since he switched to right tackle. But run blocking, that has been dominant. Like, it showed up a couple weeks ago. We looked at some clips and it was like, dang, are you serious? But it's really showing up. Like, his run blocking has been outstanding. There is such a bright future with this dude. I couldn't believe it when I read that. Like, whether you like Pro Football Focus or not, that's still a pretty major accomplishment and a reward to give a guy like Sewell. What you got to love is the guy's playing through injuries. And Dan Campbell said, look, he wasn't even 100% in this last game, but he came to us Saturday morning and said, I'm playing. So shout out to Penei Sewell for that. And that award, well-deserved for Sewell. We'll see if he can keep it up for the rest of the season. But because of this offensive line play with a Decker back, now, of course, Evan Brown, as we said, he's on the COVID list. I'm sure we said that in the injury report, so I won't go back into that. The pass pro has been better, and it's also led to the Lions' ability to have T.J. Hockenson and Brock Wright going out for passes. Instead of having to leave these guys in the block consistently, we're able to put them out on patterns, and it's helping open up other guys, but it's also made them such a big threat because it's clear Goff loves his tight ends. I think a lot of that has to do with size, but obviously Hawkinson's a game changer down the field, and we're getting to see more of that now that we're getting this O-line back, because for a stretch there, when the O-line was dealing with issues, when Frank was down, when Decker was down, we saw the Lions having a lot of underneath routes. They were having to sit Hockenson in there, and they weren't able to, leave. Sometimes they had to go for really heavy protection. It was leading to a lot of quick passes, and we saw less Hockenson, and all of a sudden, these red zone touchdowns, big plays near the end zone that we were seeing at the beginning of the season are coming back, and honestly, to another level. But I also think there's some notes about Jared Goff that we had coming into the season. Oh, good and bad. When I say that, good and bad, like this last game, okay? Think about this stat for a second. 275 of his 296 passing yards were not under pressure. All 3 touchdowns were not under pressure. The pick was under pressure, technically. 3 touchdowns, 22 completions. Like, those were his stats when he was not under pressure. That's something that we knew coming into the season was going to be so important, is if you can keep him clean. One of his biggest strengths to me is a lot of times his eyes. Now, of course, the interception, he got locked on Hockenson too long, but he does a really good job with his eyes, moving defenders right off the snap. I mean, even to the littlest things of rolling out on a play and just putting your eyes up to get a defender to jump and flip it around him. Like, I think his eyes are one of his biggest strengths, but we know the off-schedule things is not his biggest strength. Like, we know that. We talked about that coming into the season, and we're seeing it. There's some opportunities on film where I felt like, okay, maybe if he would have stepped up and tried to bomb it, like, there's an off-schedule opportunity here. He just didn't take that opportunity, or he didn't even look for that opportunity. He is one of those guys that, as we said all offseason, on time, on schedule, he can be very good. You get a lot of off-schedule situations, things can get pretty bad. And we're also starting to see some of these deep passes coming back that we saw early in his career with LA. We knew it was there. The guy can throw the deep ball. Like, he was one of the top deep ball passers 2018 and 2019, and now we're seeing it come back. Right? I mean, this last game, he had a lot of deep balls. I think he was like 3 for 6 in the touchdown, but it may have been better than that after watching it, depending on what you call a deep ball. But in the past, I mean, he was one of the top passers. Like in 2019, he had the second highest completion percentage on passes over 20-plus yards behind only Drew Brees. Like, that's something that he's had in his game, and now we're seeing it come back. So there's good and there's bad that we're going to look at on the film. Maybe some missed opportunities there, and of course the interception. But definitely tune into the All-22. But the reason I bring that up is because Goff won the NFC Offensive Player of the Week. I was kind of surprised. I mean, I don't know. I don't watch all the other games, so I didn't know what he was up against. Did not play a perfect game, but he did play a good game. And I especially could think because it was our first win, because it was a game-winning drive, that, they looked at it and said, okay, that's worth it. That's worth giving it. So congratulations, Jared Goff. That's a really cool accomplishment. NFC Offensive Player of the Week. I don't know when's the last time we had one of those. I'm sure we've had one, recently, but that's awesome. So congrats, Jared Goff. And that's cool. And hopefully that does help his confidence. I don't know where that came from, but I saw that on Twitter and I was like, oh my goodness, I have to save that. She took this picture. Okay, hey, do you? I'm not sure what the situation was here, why he decided that this is a good picture, but hey, I'm not mad at it. Speaking of awards, Jason Cabinda is our Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee. So shout out to Jason Cabinda. I know he's been working with some schools. He's had some food drives, or he said book drives. He's got a lot going on. So shout out to Jason Cabinda. And you've seen him all around the league. Justin Simmons for the Denver Broncos is his 3rd straight time of being the Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee. So, shout out to all those guys around the NFL that have been nominated for that. To the game for next week, Dan Campbell said, look, Denver is not a bad opponent. We know that. Like, they brought the running game. We know they have some great running backs. Javonte Williams, 34% missed tackle percentage. That's the highest since 2006. That's higher than Nick Chubb last season. Right, 34%. That's insane. We know Javonte was a beast still coming out of the draft, so I can't even say him shocked. Plus, they got Melvin Gordon in there. But he said, look, Teddy Bridgewater will take care of the ball. He's a winner. He said Bridgewater every Saturday back in New Orleans, he would get out there with the young guys, with the practice squad players, with the backups, and they would go through the entire game plan together because he was the backup in New Orleans. That's pretty cool. This is kind of like a playoff game for them. And actually, Vic Fangio was asked, should the guys be looking at it as a playoff game? And he's like, yeah, they should be looking at it as every game is a playoff game. So this is a huge one for them. We know that. Technically, it's a playoff game for us because we do need to win out, even though the scenario is less likely than it is for Denver. One of his coolest answers Dan Campbell gave, and I actually may throw the clip in here if I get it, but he talked about, the idea of winning at the end of the season and if that actually carries momentum into the next season. I thought Dan Campbell had a great answer, kind of summarizing here. He said, This is important because it's what we expect from our players day to day in practice. A lot of these young guys are learning from these vets, the Brockers, the Anzalonis. And he's like, for the young guys, it's an opportunity for them to figure it out. Plus, then you get an extra draft this season. You get another free agency. You start signing some of these free agents back. And, of course, a lot of these young guys, they're going to be core pieces. They're going to be huge parts of this team, physically, defensively, but really on both sides next season. So you talk about that, and then he's like, plus then you get another draft. You get another free agency. You sign some of these free agents that we have this year back. One guy I think that's really pushing his name into that, of course, Charles Harris, but now Josh Reynolds. I mean, I would love to have a guy like Reynolds back. Man, I wish we could have Reynolds all season. I really do. Like, when I talk about how I'm talking about St. Brown playing at Z and why that's kind of led to some issues, I think a lot of it actually has to do with height. We'll take a look at that in the All-22, but Tyrell was supposed to be that guy. He was 6'4", and now we're at Josh Reynolds, who is now kind of our ex-receiver because we lost Cephas as well, but man, it'd been nice to have Reynolds all season. That guy is nice, and Goff trusts him, and he just wins his one-on-ones. Like, Goff has him one-on-one. The ball a lot of times is going there. He's just like, I trust you to win your one-on-one, and Reynolds is doing that. Slant, deep route, whatever it is. So, I like Josh Reynolds. The talent level goes up a little bit, and now you're looking like you're in the range of a Pittsburgh and a Baltimore. Like, oh, snap. Okay, I like that. That gets me excited. It comes down to you got to learn how to win. As a young team, you have to learn these things. And if you keep losing and you pick up bad habits and you carry that in next season, that's not a good thing to carry. You have to learn how do we close games, because a lot of these young players are going to be staples of your team going forward, and you got to know that they know what to expect in the future, and they know how to close out games, and they know how to do things the right way. That way they can lead the path for all these rookies that will be coming in, because you're going to have a lot of young players coming in this offseason through the draft when you have possibly around 10 picks, this year. And, of course, free agency, and you're spending money. So you got a lot of new pieces. So you need these dudes to be able to lead the way. Talk about St. Brown. He said, look, I mean, this guy, he's smart. He doesn't look like a rookie. Josh Reynolds said, man, if I didn't know he was a rookie, I would have no idea. He called him a bulldog. And Dan Campbell said, we're asking him maybe more than anybody else in that receiver room, play different spots. We'll see on the All-22. He's playing everywhere. Fangio talked about the Lions a little bit. He said, look, they've played very well. Their last 4 games, they have a tie, they have a win, and their 2 losses. The last 4 weeks have been very competitive. He's like, you can't look at the record. You can see improvements. They're a good football team. I think that's what a lot of teams are going to see, is that if we keep playing like we've been the last 4 weeks, like, this is not going to be an easy out for any of these teams coming up. They're going to have their hands full. So for the Denver, which is looking at this like a playoff game, you got your hands full, man, because this team is they're not going to go away. I think this is setting up to be a great matchup on the road. I think this is setting up to be a beautiful matchup. This is going to be a fun one to watch for sure, even if it is very low scoring, which is very possible because of the 2 teams in this game. I think this is going to be a great matchup. He brought up the run game, of course. Swift is a good player. They power run, they zone run, and they stick to it is really one thing that he noted, and that's true. Lions they're trying not to get away from the run game. Dan Campbell does not want to get away from the run game. I think earlier this season we gave him some hate for that, but he does not want to get away from the run game. He loves his run game. Miami, he fired a dude because they were getting away from the run game. So he fired his OC as an interim head coach. When does that happen? I probably hit on a lot of this stuff like injury updates in the injury report. So I'll just leave it there, and then we'll take a look at the playoff thing. And until next time, thank you for watching. So let's take a quick look at this playoff machine and how the Lions could possibly make the playoffs. How are they still alive with 5 games left in the season coming off their first win? Now, the scenarios actually seem a little bit tougher, actually, since the Lions had their first win. A lot of that had to do because Philly won last week, going through last week's schedule. But it is still possible the Lions could make the playoffs. Is it likely? No. But is it impossible? No. That's the important part, because crazier things have happened than a couple of crazy finishes in football games. So it's not likely that this is going to go down, but it's that time of year. We got 5 weeks left. We're still technically alive, so let's do this while we still can. Let's still have fun with it, because there's probably a lot of scenarios that after this week the Lions could be eliminated. So let's just do this while we can and have some fun with it, okay? And roll through the scenario that I found of how the Lions could actually make the playoffs. Now, I'm sure there's other little ways that this could happen. I tried to go through the one that made the most sense to me, but I wasn't able to find a way for the Lions to make the playoffs without a tie happening in another game around the league. And I'll explain why. Maybe there's a way to do it. I was really trying to find a way of, okay, how can there not be a tie and the Lions could make the playoffs? How could this work out where the Lions still get in without 2 teams tying? Because that's super unlikely. But we tied, so it's not impossible. Something can still happen like that. So here's what I found after going through this. As you can see, the left record is the current records. The right record is the projected records. We know 3 teams are getting into wildcard spot. We will not win the division. We only have 1 win. Packers already have 9. We can't even win 9 games this season. Even if we ran the table, we would only have 6. So we got to get a wildcard spot. So 3 teams get into the wildcard. Now, LA I mean, they got like 9 wins. Or where are they at right now? 8, 9. They got 8 wins now. They're 8-4. They're kind of a lock to get in. Washington in this scenario to me is kind of a lock to get in, just because of certain games that they have to win. So you're really just looking at that 7th seed. How can the Lions jump into the 7th seed? I've seen people say, well, I got him to the 6th seed. Maybe there's ways to do that. I don't know. Maybe I just ain't smart enough to figure that out. But here's what I was able to do with the Lions, and here's how I was able to make it happen. So here's where the issue comes in. It's the NFC South. As you can see, they have 3 teams currently that have 5 wins. That makes it tough because they play each other multiple times for the rest of the season. So because 3 teams have 5 wins, if any of those teams win 2 games and they're playing each other, all of a sudden they're getting that last wild card spot. Plus, you throw in then San Francisco, who's already has 6 wins, plus they have a tiebreaker on us, but we have the tie, so it makes things weird anyways. But you have San Fran, you got Philly, like there's a lot of teams like Philly right now, 6-7. They're still technically in the mix, right? So there's a lot of weirdness. Seattle's probably still in the mix somehow. Minnesota's in the mix. There's still a lot of teams up there that are very similar in records. But this is how I got it to happen, real quickly. First off, Lions win out, which means they get a tiebreaker over Atlanta, which is very important. They also would have to win over Seattle, which would push them down. So the Lions would have to start with winning out. As you can see, they beat Denver here. That's where it's got to start. Now, San Francisco, because they already have 6 wins, we can't allow them to win a game, and they also beat us. So I have them losing to Cincinnati here. As you see, Chicago's losing to Green Bay. Some of these don't matter too much. Some of these matchups, like this Giants-Chargers one, I mean, it's not a huge deal. Now, Saints-Jets, as unlikely as it may be, maybe it could happen. I mean, the Saints don't look that great. I know Taysom Hill's a little banged up, but I have the Jets beating the Saints here. That has to happen. And then Dallas, they pull away with their division, beating Washington. I guess these aren't super necessary either. I mean, if Washington won a game like this, I don't think it'd throw anything off. They just have 10 wins. Seeding would change around. There's probably different ways you can get seeding. I saw someone do this and had the 2nd seed was Tampa Bay. So I'm sure there's different ways to have some of the top tier seeding. The big one here is this one. It's the Atlanta-Carolina game. And I'm sure there's another way that there could be another tie, assuming that there has to be a tie. From what I figured out, I think there has to be a tie. I'm not 100% sure, but I think there has to be. But I think this one works really well because if these 2 teams tie this week, you have Carolina and Atlanta basically putting themselves in the same boat as we are. And what's great about this is that if that happened, right, they'd have that tie on the record. Plus, we play Atlanta. So if we beat Atlanta, we'd have the tiebreaker, which ultimately put us over Atlanta. I think they'll also slide us above Carolina, and that's why we're in the playoff spot. So if they could tie this week and make things much easier. Still super unlikely, but much easier. This one, yeah, okay, if Seattle lost to Houston, that'd make it a little bit easier, right? But I mean, it doesn't matter too much. I mean, in this scenario, I still have them beating Houston. So I think it can work out like that. I didn't go through all of these games, but a lot of them I did. Like Arizona, LA. I mean, LA is we're not gonna get a better record than LA. So take whoever you want. We'll put Arizona. I mean, that's fine. Okay. Anyway, that one might matter. Okay, so move on to next week. So the next week, of course, we beat Arizona, which is not gonna be easy, but you got to do it if you're gonna somehow get in. So we beat Arizona in this situation. I got Chicago over Minnesota. Those are 2 interesting ones because you have Chicago 4-8, Minnesota 5-7. Minnesota, we just beat them. I wasn't able to really find any matchups where it's like, oh, Minnesota can knock this team out of the playoff thing for us. I couldn't really find those matchups. Did I miss one in week 14? I don't see one. Who did they play? Did they play in week 14? Am I missing something? Minnesota, where you at? Where you at, Minnesota? Yeah, they should play. Who do they? Steelers. Yeah. So I didn't see a matchup where it's like, oh, they can knock this team out for us. So in this case, Minnesota can win or lose, I guess, this game because of how it works out. But we can't have them get to 7 wins because then, if they had 7 wins, then they just move above us. Even though we just beat them, they move above us. So we'll just give them the win here because maybe that's more likely than Chicago wins. Either one. Pick whoever you want. But Washington beats Philly. That's important because Washington has to knock Philly down, who's already has 6 wins. I didn't realize it, but they already got 6 wins. So, of course, 7 pushes us out. So they got to beat Philly. All right, you need Philadelphia to lose out, right? You need them to lose their last 4 games of the season. So in this case, Washington's got to beat Philly. We got to beat Arizona. Another big one here, Saints lose to Tampa Bay, which is very possible. Saints get beat. That's big. I got Rams beating Seattle here, so Seattle's still at 6 wins. But again, if Seattle would have lost in week 14 to Houston, then this one really wouldn't matter. Now, if they did it now it'd matter because they take our spot. But since I have them beating Houston, now if they lost to Houston, like let's say Seattle gets beat by Houston, then this one really don't matter. See? So some of these, there's still things that can flip-flop that can still happen. But the big ones are Atlanta, San Francisco here. That's a big one because Atlanta needs to beat San Fran because they already got 6 wins, so they can't win again. So Atlanta's got to beat San Francisco. And this is why it becomes tough because you want to say, okay, well, hold up. Is there a scenario where these teams that all have 5 wins could all end up with 6 wins? Yes, there's scenarios for that, but a lot of it, I think, has to happen with a tie because they play a team like San Fran. So I can't let Atlanta, beat Carolina in week 14, and then come back and beat San Fran because then they have 7 wins. And they gotta beat San Fran because if not, San Fran has 7 wins, so they're automatically above us. We can't catch that. So San Francisco has to lose, which makes this tough. And then you can see Dallas. I put Dallas over the Giants. Just make things a little bit easier maybe. On the week 16, Lions, of course, beat Atlanta. That's the big one because of the tie. Now we have the tiebreaker over Atlanta, so that pushes them down. I have San Francisco losing Tennessee. Again, very possible. Definitely can happen. Is that the Thursday game? Is that why that's where it's showing up? That's a good Thursday game. So I got Tennessee, winning that one. LA beat Minnesota. That'd be helpful. You look through, this is the big one. Miami beating New Orleans. They've been hot. Miami would have to beat New Orleans because, of course, that's AFC versus NFC. AFC's got to win. We got to root for the AFC in a lot of these situations. It's usually what it comes down to. Dallas over Washington. This one I don't think matters. Yeah, it's just seeding changes, so it doesn't really matter, but I just took Dallas because they're leading the division. Big one here. Giants beating Eagles. Because, again, if the Eagles win, they have 7 wins, so they get in over us. So you got to have the Giants. They got to beat the Eagles, and there's a lot going on in this. And then Tampa Bay beating Carolina, because if Carolina wins, then as you can see, they have 7 wins, and they're above us. So I have Tampa Bay beating Carolina, which, again, is very possible. So I think there's a lot of matchups in this week that could definitely happen, and I think we could definitely beat Atlanta. So that moves us to week 17. We beat Seattle, which would push them down, right? So that's helpful. And then you have Carolina, New Orleans. That's the big one. This time I have Carolina beating New Orleans, because I have New Orleans winning, I think, week 18. That's right. See, I have New Orleans winning week 18. This is where things get weird. I had to give Carolina the win over New Orleans, and just because of the way I played it out. So I have to give Carolina a win. Now you may say, okay, why don't you just give the Saints the win and then push Carolina down? We can see it puts them at 7 wins, and the reason that happens is because the next week I have to have the Saints, who need to beat Atlanta because they had to beat San Francisco. So you see what I'm saying? Because Atlanta has to beat San Fran. So if they win another game, then they're at 7 wins. So I have to say Carolina beats New Orleans to push them back down. Okay, so again, it's a lot of craziness. Again, some of these don't matter. Giants over Bears in this situation. Bills over Falcons, that has to happen. And then here you have Texans over the San Francisco 49ers, because as you can see, if they win any games, they would get 7 wins on the season. So they're in a pretty good spot. That's what's important with that week. I think that's all the big ones. All right, and then he moves on to the final week of the season, week 18. We have to beat Green Bay. A couple big ones here. Like I said, Saints would have to beat Atlanta because they already have the win over San Fran, so you need the Saints to beat them, which would be their only win. So that's a way that those two teams could only have 1 win through this whole path. And then you have Carolina, who only won 1 game. They would have to win it this week. Washington, I have them beating the Giants to keep pushing any of these wild card teams down. Chicago over Minnesota. I have to have Chicago win this game, because otherwise, as you can see, if Chicago loses this game, then Minnesota gets in. So I got to have Chicago win. So that's sort of the way that this can be done. And of course, like I said, San Francisco would have to lose out. So they would have to lose to LA. So based on this scenario, that's how I figured it out, with a tie. And I'm sure there's other games that could probably be a tie. Like if let's say, I don't know, maybe if this one's a tie, if New Orleans and Carolina tie, then New Orleans gets over us. But then this tie wouldn't be necessary. I shouldn't have done this. Now I just confused myself completely. So, okay, then if Carolina beats Atlanta, then we're good. So, yeah, there can be different ties. So, Carolina could beat Atlanta this week. And then these two teams can come back in week number 17 to tie each other, and we still get in. So, there's ways that it could flip. But I do believe we need a tie. I could not find a way to do this without a tie because of our dang tie. If only we could have made a field goal. If we literally had 2 wins, I know that sounds crazy. If we had just 1 more win, we'd be in such a better spot. If we could have beat San Fran, like your chances probably go up big time. Because right now it's way less than 1% chance. If you would have beat San Fran, or if you would have made that field goal in Pittsburgh, even like one extra win somewhere, your chance to make this go way up. Because I don't think at that point you would actually need to have a tie. But in this case, I think you do. So this is a couple scenarios on how it can go down. Not very likely, but still possible. So I want to share this with you guys.